Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to The Final Verdict. I'm Charlie.
And my name is Zach. On today's episode, we're going to be discussing the Supreme Court case Gideon versus Wainwright.
A little information about it, our thoughts on the case, and our opinion on the outcome. Today should be an interesting episode.
Now, Gideon v. Wainwright is pretty interesting. Clarence C. Gideon was low-key a permanent menace. He spent most of life behind bars.
Now, how the flip did Gideon get in front of the Supreme Court?
Well, he was actually initially charged with felony breaking and entering in the state of Florida. But his problem was due to him running on zero vibes or dollars, he couldn't afford an attorney. And the judge refused to appoint one due to it not being a capital offense.
I mean, shouldn't have been simple. According to my pocket constitution, the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution clearly guarantees those accused of crimes several rights, including the right to legal counsel.
Well, let's take a step back. That's true. But originally, that amendment only applied to federal cases. Now, the 14th Amendment addresses the states specifically, explaining that states should not make or enforce laws abridging the rights of citizens or depriving those citizens of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. This makes the case less simple as it requires selective incorporation.
For our viewers, selective incorporation is the Supreme Court's process of deciding which parts of the Bill of Rights are essential to liberty and therefore applying to the states. In other words, the court applied rights case by case rather than all at once.
Now, this actually made Gideon v. Wainwright a big deal because it would determine if the Sixth Amendment, right to counsel in criminal cases, extended to felony defendants in state courts.
Interestingly, the case ended with a unanimous decision favoring Mr. Gideon.
I mean, honestly, I think that was the right call. Imagine being expected to defend yourself in a court of law with zero legal training. That's like showing up to a calculus exam when you only ever taken basic addition.
Exactly. The state has trained prosecutors whose sole mission is to convict you, while you're just one person trying to figure out what the heck objection even means. That's not justice, that's a rigged fight.
What's crazy too is how much this case reshaped criminal law. Before Gideon, a lot of states didn't provide public defenders unless the case involved the death penalty. But this ruling basically said, nope, everyone deserves a lawyer no matter what.
Yeah, it really leveled the playing field. Wealth should never determine whether you get a fair trial or not. The right to counsel shouldn't be a luxury, it should be a guarantee.
What's interesting is after Gideon v. Wainwright, states actually had to start building systems to make that happen. Public defender offices were created all across the country to make sure that people who couldn't afford lawyers would still get one. Specifically, it led to the Criminal Justice Act of 1964, establishing funding for a system providing free legal representation to defendants.
You know, some of those systems still struggle today, but the fact they exist at all started with this case. Gideon didn't just help one man, it forced entire states to recognize that justice must be accessible to everyone, not just the upper class.
Exactly, and it's actually kind of wild that one guy who was sitting in prison with nothing but a pencil and some paper managed to start this huge constitutional shift. Gideon literally hand wrote his appeal to the Supreme Court.
You know, that sounds literally just like something you'd hear straight out of a movie. Man writes his own petition, takes on the system, and wins. You've gotta respect the persistence.
Real talk. This case also shows that the Constitution isn't just an old piece of paper sitting in a museum. It's something that it still evolves. The court used the 14th Amendment due process clause to say, hey, the states can't just ignore fundamental rights.
Yeah, it's a perfect example of how the Bill of Rights got expanded over time. Selective incorporation turned the Constitution into something that actually protects everyone, not just the people in the federal court.
I mean, personally, I think Gideon v. Wainwright was one of those rare cases where the system actually corrected itself. It showed that justice isn't perfect, but it can still work when people push back.
I totally agree. And now, because of this case, if you get arrested and can't afford a lawyer, you'll hear those famous words. If you cannot afford an attorney, one will be provided for you. And that is Gideon's legacy.
And even though the public defenders are overworked and underpaid, they've become a critical part of our justice system. Millions of people every year rely on them to make sure they're not thrown into court alone, just like Gideon.
And in a way, every time someone hears their Miranda rights or is given a public defender, they're hearing an echo of Gideon's fight for justice.
I mean, it's a pretty powerful takeaway. From one guy's handwritten appeal to one of the most important protections in criminal justice.
All right, I think that's a wrap for today's episode.
Thanks for tuning in to the final verdict. Make sure to catch us next time where we'll tackle another big Supreme Court case and break it into plain English.
Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and don't try to represent yourself in court.
I mean, seriously, just leave it to the lawyers.
All right, have a nice day.